Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Ben McLeish, and this is the March 27th ZM Global podcast for the Zeitgeist Movement. You'll have to bear with us. Our normal schedule is that we do one of these every week, but with the intricacies and commitments of Z-Day having taken over the last couple of months of many of our lives, every now and again it gets very hard to dedicate an hour or so of sensibly planned and coherent time on the radio to go through the various bits of news from the movement. So I'm going to try over the next hour or so to draw all my threads into a coherent knot and give you an idea of what's been going on over the last couple of weeks. So the first and most obvious bit of news is that March 17th was our International Zeitgeist Day event. These are events that are usually focused in one particular event, but also have sympathetic events around the world that sort of mirror them, that feature speakers in a very data-driven, orientated way to explain our worldview and our, if you like, our policies towards the reorientation of human society to live sensibly on a planet that allows certain elements to happen and allows for certain behaviors and certain ways of expending our natural resources, if you like, driven from many different angles. So the Los Angeles event, which was, yes, March 17th at a very nice location, very high up in the Hollywood Hills, featured about 11 speakers. We had the whole gamut there. Many of them had been flown in from around the world. We had people such as Sarah Gutierrez, Charlene Bezegi, who introduced the whole events and essentially introduced the movement to the audience. We had Peter following up afterwards with a brief history of economic thought, which was a very useful presentation. That's being edited. All of these are being edited at the moment to be uploaded online. We did have a live webcast, which got about, I think, 8,000 views. But each one of these was, of course, recorded from two different HD camera angles with in-mic sound and all the rest of it. Those are being put together now and will come out on YouTube shortly. Shortly after Peter, we had Matt Berkowitz from the Canadian chapter talking to us about logical fallacies and elements like that, to do really with ways of thinking. So we're combining understandings about the methods of the movement, understandings about the way that economics functions, plus also a focus on how we think and what can be impaired or what can be allowed when we think correctly, if you like, according to the structure of logical truth, if you like. We also, of course, had all the other speakers as well. Jen Wilding was there to speak. Douglas Millett was speaking, and I'm looking forward to his video, actually, because there was a nice comparison with Pants from When You Were 9. I won't give any other elements and any other hints for that. It's worth watching yourself when it comes out. Federico Pistono of the Italian Zeitgeist chapter was over as well. And we also had Jason Lord, who is, of course, the LA coordinator, as well as Brandon Christie as well, talking. I spoke briefly for about 15, 16 minutes. I'm not sure which anymore. And, of course, we had the world-famous Brandy Hume as well. And Ava Omori finished it all up with a musings on some elements of transition. It's always tricky to talk about transition from one paradigm to another. As I pointed out to Jason and to a couple of others, I think it was Douglas as well, we can't even talk about the transitions of prior historical ages into other historical ages. And for those, we have, quote unquote, all the facts. So it's very tricky to speak and to presume to be able to speak about the movements from one paradigm to another, especially when the paradigms are, of course, slightly different, even if in their underlying value system they are broadly the same across the world. But nevertheless, Ava gave it a good old go and gave us some ideas about what qualifies in the short term as a sort of pressures upon the traditional market monetary system that we've come to know as the free market capitalist structure. Whatever the intricacies of that happen to be, it tends to be a prioritization of profit over the methods of life organization on the planet, one might say. And then, of course, after all of that, we had about just short of an hour, I think, of a Q&A as well, which was then extended outside of the venue as well, of course, as it always is. If you've ever been to any of our events, you will know that the questions that are posed outside are way longer and have better and longer answers, I think, than the ones that are in any particular space. But that was very nice as well. And so the whole day, eventually, what was it, 2 o'clock till about 8:15, plus a give or take an hour here or there on the other side as well. Very, very pleasing. We managed to run inside our allotted time, which, given the fact that we had to concatenate the work and the different the timings of 11 speakers, worked actually pretty well. So I thought that was very nice. The overall focus of this, in 11 different angles, if you like, was that we are holistically talking about the notion of and the effects of and the attitudes towards public health within the arena of social life sciences, if you like. It doesn't mean very much to only talk about GDP being the measure of any kind of societal health, given its wonderful life blindness. One thing that's always explained by economists is that, well, somebody who has 10 million or 10 billion must have earned that by satisfying his fellow man in some way. Of course, that satisfaction can be very much driven and demanded and completely falsified by marketing, for a start. One thinks immediately of cigarettes, alcohol, hard drugs, and all the rest of it, let alone the machinations of banking, which can produce those kinds of wealth. It doesn't mean anything. There's no real fixed point or even a floating point when it comes to measuring social health or societal health if we're purely looking at it from profit. So the whole day was organized around understanding the grander implications, if you like, of what it means to have a healthy public. Not just individuals who are physically well, but the overall effect of economic activity upon the attitudes towards our environment which sustain us, the attitudes towards each other, and we, of course, sustain each other, the attitudes towards new information, data, and everything that runs from that. That can be extended all the way out to nutrition, to medicines, to different kinds of energy requirements, and the overall orientation of our social structure towards what it means to be truly sustainable if we are to take the globe and the people on it as the context, if you like, for our future, rather than individual nations. There are no nations to speak of when we're talking about this kind of public health. An atom bomb going off in South Korea is not going to be a South and North Korean event. It's going to be a world event that affects everybody around it without any say, without any meaningful barriers to be placed on the whole thing. So that's really where we're coming from with the whole thing. And it was very, very enjoyable, I must say. It was also very nice to see that ET3, the people behind the evacuated tube transport systems, were also there on Zeitgeist Day. They brought with them a model of an ET3 pod, if you like, something that can hold 4 people. And what happens is, it's quite clever, it was actually only half a pod, with the other half being a mirror image of you. So you can get a sense of where the other people would be sitting and how large it would be, and how it's, of course, much more comfortable than an aircraft seat, if you like. It was very nice there. There was a good deal of take-up from the people that were there, and it was very nice meeting the people who've been behind that company. I mean, we've been dealing with them, I would suppose, on and off for about 4 years now, ever since they were essentially made an appearance and were advocated for in the movie Zeitgeist Addendum. So they were both there. There was actually 3 of them there. That was very nice as well. And it gave people some concrete context, I think, to the understanding of what it means to really pursue the possibilities that we actually have with the current state of technology, the way it is, rather than the way it's been implicated and actually implemented, if you like, within society, to get a real sense of what might be possible, to get a sense of what a world may look like and feel like to interact with if we were able, for example, to travel across the States in 20 minutes, or to travel to China in an hour and a half, depending on, of course, where you're coming from and what the route allows in terms of speeding up and slowing down and various elements to do with the organization of that system. It comes at a very important juncture, of course, to be talking about particular kinds of transport, since at the moment it is all the rage amongst most governments of the world, including the UK government, to talk about high-speed rail links. They're normally high-speed rail links between areas where people shouldn't really be in a rush to get to. Birmingham is the one in the UK that I can think of that was amusingly made fun of by the Daily Mash, which is essentially a satire news website that said it turned out that nobody was in a rush to get to Birmingham. But these so-called high-speed rail links are, of course, phenomenally slow. Phenomenally slow when we look at what is actually possible, and how energy can really be utilized and technology can be utilized to really get speed without just simply basing it on the old carbon energy that we're refusing to move away from so easily in the meantime. With which general rambling, I will have to move on to a brief discursion on the London event. I wanted to offer this. This also happened, I think they came out on the 16th of March, actually. This was organised by James Phillips, a gentleman who you've heard on this radio show before, and a chap called Christian Mason as well. The model for the London event was an interesting one I wanted to open up to the community because it operates slightly differently to how we've done it in London before, and I think how we've done it generally before. This year it was decided to open up the speaking slots of the London event, not just to new speakers like we've done, of course, in years past. It's always important to get new faces on the go so that people don't get hung up on particular people and what they might have as an angle, because the people are ultimately completely irrelevant. I'm always baffled when people are fascinated to meet me. I'm really just some guy. I don't even do this in my main life. It feels very strange to be seen in that sense by some people who may have only, of course, encountered me that way. But we actually, I should say, the London chapter deliberately invited third parties to author a speech for Zeitgeist Day 2013 London. Amongst the people we had were such stalwarts for the movement as the Equality Trust. Because the Equality Trust was set up by Richard Wilkinson and Kate Pickett, who are famous for the work The Spirit Level, which talks about how equality seems to be the measure of value that runs through many societies, and it is when you change the relative equality, that is to do with the top 10% of that particular culture as compared with the very bottom 10%, their relative positions, not really even their absolute positions, and how everything seems to suffer or do well based on that index, if you like. Well, we didn't get Richard Wilkinson or Kate Pickett because, of course, they're phenomenally busy. But we had somebody who was essentially one of their statisticians come and talk to the London Zeitgeist Day crowd about their work with the Equality Trust. And I've been told, although I haven't been able to see it myself yet, that it was a fantastic speech as well, very, very enlightening. We also had, again, people who've worked with us in the past. They may not completely see eye to eye with us, but we had Positive Money on, Ben Dyson, who has, of course, been doing a great job at authoring quite a few books, working with the New Economics Foundation, and himself presenting what it means at the moment, what is actually wrong with at least the global banking crisis, as seen particularly through the prism of the UK. He's done a lot of stuff before. We've also done parallel events before. And he came and spoke as well, which is very good. We also had David Wood of Humanity Plus also doing a talk on technological singularity and, again, the boundaries, the perceived boundaries, the acceptable boundaries, and the implications of the lack of boundaries or the breaking down of the boundaries of human biology with technological innovation as well. David previously has also actually worked with us very briefly. I did a speech in, I believe it was 2010, called The Future of Economics, which he organised. He organised that for his Humanity Plus people and has worked for years himself in technology. He's a very interesting man to listen to. And again, the overall feedback I got from the people who were there that day is that it was a fantastic speech as well. There were a few others as well. I can't reel them off the top of my head at the moment. But all of these people contributed to what was essentially a multifaceted and also multi-movement, if you like, organizational event that was umbrellaed by the Zeitgeist Movement and presented to the audience and to the world as various angles and attitudes towards global redesign, towards the awakening culture of the truly globalized, rather than the globalization that's to do with money shifts and to do with general financial and economic warfare. The real implications of living together, using disruptive technologies that are bringing us closer together, making us more efficient, making human labor less worthwhile and less important and less efficient even than the technological alternatives that are so easily implementable. And more on that in a second, by the way, because I'm going to be talking about a visit to the Shasta Dam in Northern California, which was undertaken right after Z-Day, actually. The overall effect of this particular organization of Z-Day, not that it must be something you do, not that it must even be something that we particularly think is, replicatable, whatever. The goal of this seems to be to slightly diffuse the tension that it is somehow the Zeitgeist movement that will run everything, or that it's our way or the highway. Of course, if anybody has spent any time listening to myself or listening to anybody else on this radio show or reviewing any of our materials, it should become fairly obvious that our worldviews and our attitudes are really only created out of an understanding of the current scientific information that has been given to us from many different people, from many different directions, many of whom don't even agree with the overall holistic approach because they take things in part in a certain particular way in only one subject area and can't apply it to the full mode of what is being offered by us. That's not any lack of ability, it's just a different kind of frame of reference. We don't have any opinions, really. Our opinions change with science as they progress. What we can see is trends, and what we can only wish to advocate for is the collective working together of these various wonderful branches of science which are coming out now, from the social science, the studies on stress, the studies on how being in a culture affects you and how being you affects culture, and all the rest of it, the machinations and the effects of various economic models based on essentially presuppositions by opinion from prior generations that are very hard to depose because they're steeped in tradition. That's the great, terrible power that a lot of these incumbent positions have over the new, is simply they came first. There's a strength that they hold over the mind in a way, almost by being original, if you like, by being early, by being old, by being revered in that way, that of course have to be tackled at some point. All tradition has always been overthrown, and all traditions usually were the overthrow of a prior tradition in the first place. Anyway, sorry, it's a bit of an unfocused event. This talk. So anyway, please, if you ran a Z-Day event and you recorded it, upload it, get it on YouTube. We'll link the various events from the zdayglobal.org website, which is essentially the hub for each year's Zeitgeist Day events, with the links to the various speakers and the various events that happened, the presentations, and all the rest of it. Maybe you had a 3D printer in. We had some 3D printed items in Z-Day 2012 in London, for example. Perhaps you had some other people coming and addressing your day as well. Perhaps you didn't. Either way, it's good to get all this stuff out and to post it on the forums, to post it on Facebook, to share it all over the place, and to get some traffic from people who may just be randomly looking for something that's unrelated, might end up looking at whatever it is that you were speaking about. I'll briefly explain what I was talking about on Z-Day, and it really was brief this time as well, as the audience must have been very pleased with. I chose as my discussion on public health a particular example from where really British and then ultimately American public health even came from. We have had throughout history some work on public health. Of course, we've had people like, Hippocrates with the Hippocratic Oath, the general oath towards what it means to treat a human being above self-interest is really the first time that you have public health, as opposed to an activity, an economic activity, which is self-maximizing and not based on the needs of the individual expressly. But of course, it's never really been a public discourse element. It was never really a public issue until the 1800s in Victorian England. When Victoria ascended the throne, people lived half as long as they did when she ultimately died at the end of her reign. That's not a very long time, and it certainly isn't down to genetics that people lived that long. That was because of a very specific arising of the need for a discourse and a system of public health that built into the system, a priori, if you like, as you are born into the society, a level and measure and validation of public health that meant sanitation, personal hygiene, midwives, electricity, everything was essentially the co-locator of human welfare, was the thing that extended our reach into the 60s and 70s. So people started living to the ages that we now consider normal, but in the olden days would have been considered bizarre and outlandish and unusual. So I chose this area and did some research that led me down some wonderful paths, including some books that are very hard to find online. One of them, if anybody's interested in this particular area, is a book. It's actually a collection of essays by usually postgraduates and postdoctorates and public health professionals called Cholera and Conflict. And it judges the social consequences of the outbreaks of cholera from the 1830s onwards. It happened about 5 or 6 times in major ways throughout Britain. And without giving anything away from my presentation, I think the useful element of the cholera debate, it might seem like it's very old to you now. You, of course, didn't die of cholera yesterday and have probably never had it in the first world. It is, of course, still rampantly on the go in the third world, or what we like to call the developing nations now. And that, of course, is actually a very good indicator, if you like, a co-occurring fact that shows you pretty much quite clearly the areas of the world that have yet to benefit from the building in of at least some rudimentary form of public health. The reason that cholera is so interesting is that it affects the rich and the poor. It's not the same as TB, which killed the poor mostly, and still does kill massively the poor above the rich. Or things like typhoid or typhus, which was even called, I think it was called jail fever or jail bed fever, jail cell fever, something like that. Expressly, the criminal class caught this waterborne disease quite simply because it was just passed by the rats so easily in those areas, and living in a decent house would actually save you. Not so with cholera. Cholera, which really was waterborne in a very aggressive sense, but which was not understood to be waterborne in that sense, actually, at the time. Back in the old days, when people used to happily burn each other's books, like Paracelsus did in Switzerland, a bizarre man, it's worth looking him up if you like. People believed that illness was given to you purely by the air. They called it a miasma. And perhaps because of that, but also because of the death rate being from cholera being so clearly in the rich as well as the poor areas, something happened in the 1830s, and suddenly everybody panicked. It started with the poor, of course, who were wiped out, tens of thousands over a few weeks. But because so many rich people were dying in their nice, secluded mansions, they weren't, of course, that nice, but in these sort of areas which were considered to be hopefully above the standard of living of the poor, and therefore set apart by your richness, nevertheless, the lack of the ability to get away from cholera, and the belief perhaps that it was a miasma in the air as opposed to something that you caught through the bacillus in the water, led to a fundamental shift in the way that people suddenly perceived their safety in society. Suddenly everybody, whether rich or poor, was paranoid about the fact that their society was not up to the job of being able to get rid of and kill and fight, like an immune system in the body fights the bacteria outside it, this new threat. And this new threat was something that was seen in advance as well, because it took something like 15 years for really aggressive cholera to make all its way from Bengal all the way through Russia, bringing with it huge unrest and massive riots and all the rest of it, for which we have very, very nice data that's again in this Cholera and Conflict book that's produced by the Thackeray Medical Museum in Leeds, actually, all the way through to Britain. And sure enough, as soon as it arrived, it made short work of the British population. It spread north and south from Sunderland, which is in North England, spread south to Oxford, up to Edinburgh and then Glasgow, down to Bristol, down to London, and wiped out something like 52,000 people, which is itself, by the way, already almost 4 times the population of Sunderland where it arrived. If you put that in modern day terms, considering our local conditions, the fact that we're even more closely tied together now than even London was back then. And London, of course, had already seen the doubling of its population within less than a generation. Same had been seen in Manchester, in Liverpool. There was a big move towards the cities. And suddenly, of course, healthcare had to catch up with the necessary requirements of the way that life was now structured. If this were to happen again today and we weren't in a position to have decent sewage systems, decent early prevention and early health detection systems, we would see deaths in the millions very, very easily, and those millions would die within a few days, not within a few weeks. An underlying point that people might already be thinking to themselves, by the way, is, well, since things have got better, maybe we're on the right track. Well, that's certainly true of things like cholera, perhaps. And that's, of course, because we've actually taken those steps to implement them already. One thing to point out is that we didn't arrive at public health in the modern sense through any kind of usage of the free market model. It's something I brought up on the day. It's something worth bringing up to anybody else who says that the wonderful modern quality of life we now have is due to the market system, the capitalist system, to particular fractional reserve, whatever you like, that runs in the economic system. In fact, if you look at the people, the early practitioners of public health, the early individuals who really advanced our understanding of what we now call epidemiology, which is what the Equality Trust talk about as well, this was a direct reaction to, and in fact, abnegation of the methods of the free market system, of individual proprietors of business. It was never those people. In fact, they were, I don't say they in terms of individual people, that kind of market action, if you like, was perpetuated and actually, well, to give you this example, the reason that Sunderland let cholera in so easily was because they refused to do a 15-day quarantine on the ships, because the business community didn't want it, because the business community saw only a massive depreciation and damage towards their business systems. Now, it's not their fault that 14,000 of the 17,000 people in Sunderland were, for example, peasants, and so actually it would have been a horrific detriment. This only bolsters the general point of our movement and the general point of myself and many others who say that in order to have any kind of safe society, in order to have any kind of functional society on Earth, you have to have a mode of operation that ensures the life need survival of its population, which is in line with the facts about our environment. And if you have a business system that would be damaged by, for example, cholera appearing, and you having to take necessary steps to ensure the non-death of many, many thousands of people, well, then your business system isn't valid. It's not a valid basis for the modes of operation of our society. Even further than that, we can now extend this further. Okay, I'm just talking about cholera here. What about the new understandings we have about psychosocial stress, about what it means to come into connective dissonance with the society you're living in, that belittles you through marketing and advertising, that destroys your family through labor that eclipses all free time, that slowly twists your tastes and your perceptions and accepted perceptions through violent media, through particular types of games, through particular kinds of behaviors that are shown on sitcoms. All of this kind of value programming has been covered by many documentaries and many other studies that show how quickly kids are subsumed into advertising. There's a very good film called Consuming Kids, which is worth looking at for that. Extend this even further. What does it mean if we're still using dirty, second industrial revolution technologies to power every part of our society, including the hospitals, which might see blackouts as this kind of stuff runs at a dangerously low level? We're talking about gas. Gas in the UK at the moment is at a shortage because having come back from wonderfully sunny California, I was landed back into 2 to 3 feet of snow in the north of England, where suddenly all the roads are not working, and where suddenly there's talk of gas shortages and concomitant gas rise prices as well. What does it mean if we haven't taken this into account, if we haven't prepared ourselves? And what effect does this have on the population? What can it mean for global harmony if we aren't considering these things even slightly in tandem, if not in concert, and trying to make some joined up thinking about what it means to really orientate ourselves based around all of our technological innovations and allowing for those technological innovations to carry on as we progress? this is the general focus of what I was talking about. And that neatly brings me, actually, to where I went afterwards. I took about a week after Zeitgeist Day and travelled California properly. Having never been out of LA, having been there 3 times, I'd never seen California itself. And I went up to Redding, Northern California. And in Northern California, there is a dam which should actually be more famous than the Hoover Dam. It's called the Shasta Dam. It's very near Redding. And is the product of work began, I think, in the late 1930s, certainly in the middle of the 1940s. So really, it was 1941 that they were building this dam, which of course was right when America entered the Second World War. This dam was created for a couple of different reasons. I should point out, by the way, it should be more famous than the Hoover Dam because it's much bigger than the Hoover Dam. It's in fact the second biggest dam in the United States. Forgive me, I do forget now which is the biggest one. But this dam functions in multiple different ways. Partly it's for irrigation. I don't know if the audience knows, I certainly didn't until I was told. California is essentially the breadbasket for the entire United States. 2 out of every 3 meals are grown there. Now, it's funny because many states define themselves and seem to pride to define themselves on manufacturing a certain kind of food. Peaches come from Georgia. Idaho seems to be where potatoes come from. Oranges come from Florida, and so on. And tax breaks, of course, come from Delaware. Well, California is the breadbasket. It's where most things grow. And in fact, if you drive up and down the I-5, you'll see most of it in the great San Fernando Valley, not only all the wine, but every now and again you will see a staggering view which extends halfway to the horizon, which is just cows in pens standing there, like in the movie Earthlings. But anyway, this dam essentially acts as the irrigation for that entire Southern Californian Valley area, all the way down central, all the way down to Southern California, all the way down to Ventura, and is therefore very important for that. Of course, it's also a flood barrier for those areas. They have seen a 33-foot rise in the water that comes down from the mountains overnight, at least once in their recent past, if not more. And you can even see the flood levels where it actually happens. Now, a third, and at least a third, use of this dam, of course, as you may have guessed, is hydroelectric. There are 5 giant tubes, if you like, that come out of the base of the dam at Shasta, which are so large you could drive a double-decker bus, a London Routemaster bus, through the middle of each one. They don't look like that when you're standing up on the ridge of the mountain looking down. They look, of course, like a normal air AC duct would look. These are huge elements that pour water through to 5 huge generators. The generators themselves are 6 stories high. These are vast machines that can produce incredible amounts of energy. And as we're being taken through, I noticed that only one of these generators is on. The gentleman guide, who unfortunately I couldn't record because it's a Homeland Security issue, explained that each of these 6-story generators that work on induction, based on copper wire centers and all the rest of it, can produce in 24 hours each the electrical requirements of a city the size of Dayton, Ohio, needs in a month. In other words, one day produces a month's worth of electricity for a population of some 140,000 people. That it's hard to tell. The metropolitan area, the greater metropolitan area of Dayton is in fact about 800,000 people. But let's just take the lower number for a second. So that would mean that we could in fact have 5 of these turbines running, the 6-story turbines producing every single day 6 times the requirements of a month-long energy needs of Dayton, Ohio. And that includes, by the way, all of the billboards and all of the pointless electricity that's wasted in our very, very wasteful way solely from water, from hydroelectric, from a clean source. I know it's not completely certified because it has very big effects on the environment. The Three Gorges Dam in China, for example, is of course not a green technology in the way it's been implemented. However, we're not burning fossil fuels to make this energy. A gentleman who was on the tour and whom unfortunately I didn't get to speak to afterwards, but I should have done, said that he'd come from a different state and he'd heard about the brownouts and blackouts that happened in California. These were very famous in the 1990s. There were various power companies that got famous for turning off the electricity. It turned out they were turning off the electricity in California to up the price of it. The peak usage, of course, is in the afternoon. So consequently, the price for electricity in California shoots up in the afternoon. I think it's after 11 a.m. I think it goes into its second tariff. And so the guide was advising us to do all of our washing and all the rest of it in the mornings. This gentleman said he was new to the state and didn't understand why, given the fact that this dam could create such an incredible abundance of energy, why it wasn't being used. I bit my lip as hard as I could, as the guide then said, well, you have to understand, electricity is a commodity. It is sold as a commodity, and it needs to be restricted so that it is worth something to be sold. He then also pointed out, without a hint of irony, that there is something like 100,000 dams in the United States. And at the moment, actually, the United States only operates on 17% hydroelectric power. If you take the facts I've just told you, that there are, just in the Shasta Dam, enough generators to power Dayton, Ohio for a month 6 times over, so 5 times over, in 24 hours, and that load balancing could be spread out towards all of California, you're looking at a massive increase in green energy overnight. One big criticism that we always get in the movement is that we're advocating things that are too expensive to build, that it's too expensive, that it's actually a bad use of finances to build what they consider to be boondoggles, pointless, large exercises in faux greenwashing sort of stuff, large solar panel harvesting farms that would actually probably use more carbon in the expenditure of creating the farm than what they actually harvest and all the rest of it. Well, use the Shasta Dam as an example, and all we'd have to do there is switch the bloody thing on, and we'd be ready. So it was a very, very interesting point. At the moment, we operate on a model that requires inefficiency, that requires that we don't even use the clean, functional sources of hydroelectric power, or indeed of any of the other clean sources of fuel that might actually already exist, literally, are plugged into the grid already, and are just simply not being used, because to up the output to an abundance where it starts to have a real effect on dropping the price of your electricity and dropping the environmental cost of it, which is of course way more important than what it costs to actually pay for it, is something that's selected against in our model of restriction and ownership and old folkways and traditions and mores that we've been bathed in and that we've just been born with, and which seem to be inextricably bound up with our character until we actually look at them and say, hang on, we could do this a lot better. We could do this in a way that's way more clean, way more sound, would be life environmentally, financially sound in that sense. So I thought it was a hilarious sort of example, working in practice, of the exact problem we talk about, but in such a flagrant way in which the answer to all of California's energy problems sits in a tiny secluded valley somewhere, and the switch to use it is just simply on off at the moment. So you can Google that if you like. I'll spell it for you. Shasta Dam is spelled Shasta. If you're ever there, the tour is free. The Hoover Dam is not free, and it's an amazing thing to see. It's only as a work of engineering is it already incredible that they were building this in the 1940s, that they diverted the river through what became a railway tunnel so that they could build this. And it was built really, really quickly as well. They built it ahead of schedule. They built it under budget, as if those things mean anything. But it shows you that, it really can be created. And it'll actually be finished, as in fully dried out, in something like 2040, which means it'll have taken 100 years to actually complete it in that sense. It's 3/4 of a mile thick, and the guide was only too happy to reel off all these amazing facts about how much energy it could produce, how much irrigation it provides. And ironically, he was producing really the facts on its non-use as much as the facts on its use. So a highly interesting test case. I'll try and find out and commit to paper at some point the actual wattage and output of this dam, which must be listed on their site. I just haven't had the time to collate it all, if you will. But do have a look, review it. It proves to be something that explains exactly what we talk about. So, to generally wrap my thoughts into a thread, the Z-Day videos will be out shortly on TZM official channel. Please feel free to share them and to build up your research based on all the angles they come from. We are also, of course, as a movement, about halfway through releasing our orientation guide that was meant to be ready for Z-Day, but it's proving to be much larger than we thought. Of course, having said that, we've already delivered some 100 pages of the items anyway. Those will be available and are also already in their forms available on the zeitgeistmovement.com website, which aggregates quite a few different things. So it's worth looking through those again. Those are cited and sourced front-to-back essays explaining the positions that we find ourselves in, the information that we find ourselves to be aware of, that we are unable to not know, and that therefore we choose to act upon in a certain way. We're still working on, if anybody's interested, for those who are interested in starting to publicly speak, who want to maybe launch themselves as lecturers or speakers, presenters, whatever the best word is for it. We are still in the process of trying to develop a front-to-back program that might help people, which will be available at some point. Of course, also the orientation guide itself is going to be turned into something like 20 different films, 20 different videos, I suppose is the best word for it, which will be essentially the audiobook version of those essays. And I have already rewritten a couple of my speeches as addenda for the items themselves, as appendices, if you like. I wrote and will upload somewhere, I don't know where yet, the prison lecture that I did last year for Z-Day. As a, 53 footnote cited essay, basically. Luckily, only a few of the sentences needed to be rebuilt, so they didn't sound like they were being declared from the podium. That's the old demagogue in me. And that's about it. Yes, that's enough ranting from me. You can probably tell that I've been immersing myself in my subject area for too long for the last couple of months, hence this sort of broadside that you've just received. I do apologize. I will be more measured in my responses in later broadcasts, which I plan to do more of as the time goes on. Do stick with this channel for next week, though, because unless there are any programming changes, we've got Ryan Diamond back again, and he has spoken to Charles Eisenstein, a gentleman who many people who probably have intentionally switched on this radio show will be aware of. Charles Eisenstein is the man behind several books, one of whom is the Sacred Economics. So he'll be back next week with Charles to speak about that, and he's recorded an interview with him, which is very nice. And we will be furthering our various readings of the First Civilization through Jim and all the rest of it. As a final note from me, anything that I've got coming up soon, the next major project, I suppose, that I intend to do is to deliver an audiobook version of Federico's book, Robots Will Steal Your Job, But That's Okay, How to Survive the Economic Collapse and Be Happy, what is possibly the longest title for a thing ever. I'll be, as soon as they are finished with the updates to that text, which is being worked on at the moment by various elements of the linguistic team, I will then record those as an audiobook with hopefully less ums and ers and no discursions, no wandering mind. It's much nicer to be able to just sit and read someone else's thoughts. So that'll be out sometime during the year. It depends on when Federico wants it done. The availability of that I don't know, but I'm sure it'll be posted somewhere as things progress with that. So that's everything from me and everything for this week. Keep watching for the Zeitgeist videos as they get posted for the various different Z-Days, and I look forward to speaking to you all again very soon. Tune back in next week for Charles Eisenstein being interviewed by Toronto's Ryan Diamond. Thank you, and have a safe journey until then.